Hi there, it's Bike Tour Mike here. I recently went on a 4-day bikepacking trip with my friend Ryan Van Duser here in the northern part of Sweden. Before I start unpacking everything after that trip, I thought I'd go through all the things that I brought along with you, so you can maybe get an appreciation on what type of gear you might need to bring on a trip like this if you're going bikepacking here in Finland, Sweden or Norway. And if you still haven't watched that video, you might be better off by looking at that first, and you can do that by clicking the link up here somewhere. So before I'll start talking about what I bring inside of my bike bags here, I thought I'd talk about my weapon of choice for this trip, which is my Kona Unit X. This is basically your all-terrain mountain bike. So even though this one has really wide tires, I think these are 2.6-inch wide tires, we were still able to cycle for about 100 miles each day or 160 kilometers. I think we averaged somewhere around 20 kilometers an hour. And this bike is basically just like driving a tank. You're really stable in it. And even though I was like filming with one hand all the time, going down these really steep downhills, and just holding the bike with one hand, I never felt scared or anything. It feels really stable. So if I just in general talk about my bike bags, I have a frame bag here where I keep my heavier things and also the poles and stakes for my tent, some batteries and so on. In the front I have mainly my sleeping gear, my tent and my sleeping pad, and I'll also have an accessory pack in front here where I have more things that I need instant access to throughout the day. And this seat pack back here is mainly my sleeping bag and some food and so on. So I think I'll open up these bags and show you more in detail. So in my accessory bag I have things that I want to get access to pretty quickly throughout the day. So just open up and see what we can find in here. I have my phone, like a spoon to eat with, some candy to get me some energy throughout the day, a couple of chocolate bars, and some other small miscellaneous stuff in here. So next we can go through my handlebar bag, and this is the place where you want to store your things that you don't need access to throughout the day. Although I'm breaking the rule right away here, because I have my rain gear store in this one. So if we just open up this from the side, on this side I have the clothes that I use off the bike in the evening and so on. So I have a couple of boxer shorts, a long sleeve merino wool shirt, and a pair of long pants also made out of merino wool. And I also wear merino wool when I'm riding throughout the day. And the reason why I use merino wool when I go on long bikepacking trips is that it doesn't really start to smell after a couple of days. It's really odor free. And it's also a nice material to ride in because it keeps you pretty cool throughout the day. In here I also have a very compact fleece jacket, which I mainly never used because it was pretty warm during night. So I slept pretty well without it. In here I also have a black beanie which I use when I sleep. Here is my sleeping pad. It's a Nemo Tensor insulated sleeping pad. And it's good to have an insulated one when you're bikepacking here in Sweden, because even though it might be somewhat warm during the night, you still get a bit of chill factor from the ground coming up. So even though you have a warm sleeping bag, it's always good to have an insulated sleeping pad so you stay warm throughout the night. I also have an inflatable sleeping pillow, and this one is called the C2 Summit Aeros Premium Pillow. And last but least of my sleeping kit, this is my tent. It's a Nature Hike Cloud Up 2, and this is a very budget friendly tent. I only think I paid about $120 for this, but I've had it for the last 6 years or so, I think, and I think I've probably spent about 100 nights in it so far, and I haven't got a single drop inside of it yet. So even though it was really cheap when I bought it, I've had a lot of great nights sleeping in it so far. And if I stretch in very far here, or just open up on the other side, I have easy access to my rain jacket and my rain pants in here somewhere. So these ones are from a Swedish brand called Haglöfs, and they're really compactable and don't weigh that much. And the good thing about this is that even though they have a very high water pillar and keeps the rain off you, some rain gets stuck on the outer fabric, but as you ride, if you ride for 20 minutes or so, it gets completely dry. So I really like these ones. And you know what? It's actually a couple of mosquitoes flying around here now, so I think I'll just as well put this on so I don't get eaten up by the mosquitoes here in Sweden now. And when Ryan picked this time of year to go on a backpacking trip here in Sweden, I guess he didn't know about like when the mosquito season starts and ends, and this is sort of the peak mosquito season here in Sweden. So if you want to come here when it's not that many mosquitoes, I recommend you to go to Sweden in, say, August or so. It's still really warm by then, but the mosquitoes have kind of disappeared. So up in the cockpit I also have a couple of smaller bags. This one is called a feed bag, which I usually store a water bottle or some drinks that I pick up along the road. And in this one I mainly store my camera that I'm shooting on right now, but now I just have my sunglasses in here. So this gives me really quick access to my camera, so I can just whip it out when I want to film something interesting along the road. And I also have my very old Garmin up here. I mainly just use this to monitor how long I've gone throughout the day and my average speed and so on. So let's open up the seat bag next. And in this I store some food, like a couple of these freeze-dried meals. I only have one left after the trip, but I guess you get the point. I also have my small compactable towel that I've used a couple of times to dry off after I've taken a shower in the evening. I also have some nuts and some energy bars to give me energy throughout the day. I have an extra shirt to ride in, half a roll of toilet paper, my water filter, which is a Sawyer Squeeze Mini. And talking about getting water, I only think I used that once. All the other times we've found water at gas stations or churches and so on. But this time around I brought 3 water bottles, and I think that is a good amount of water. I need a lot of water when I get to camp because I'm making some food in the evening, and I'm also like compensating on all the water I've lost by sweating it out throughout the day. So I was fine having 3 of these, and we've refilled throughout the day, but it's always nice to have a lot of water when you get to camp in the evening. Here I have a very small toothpaste, my toothbrush, a bit of sunscreen, and this one is really important. I can show you this one in detail if you were ever to go to Sweden. It's called mygga, and that's the Swedish word for mosquito. And you definitely need one of these to be able to survive in the Swedish wilderness. Otherwise, the only predator that is really dangerous here in Sweden, the mosquito, is gonna get you. And if the mosquito causes any harm or some other whammy might happen, you need to have a first aid kit. And as you can see, this is still sealed, so we had a pretty good bike trip. I brought a bike lock, which I've only had to use once, and that was when we finally went our separate ways. Otherwise, a good thing is when you're traveling 2 together, you can just take turns watching each other's bikes when you go into the supermarket. Or just like we went into a couple of restaurants and Usually you can just leave your bike outside and still be able to see it through a window or so on. And I guess the region we were going through were very low populated, so it never really felt scary leaving our bikes outside for a couple of minutes or so. In Sweden, people are generally very honest, so they kind of leave your stuff alone. I also brought an extra pair of socks that I use when I'm riding, a small amount of wet wipes, a patch kit and some small tools for the bike. Here I also have some extra food that I didn't eat during the ride. It's just some oatmeal and some instant pasta and so on. I also brought this one. This is a sleeping liner, and it turned out to be really warm throughout the night, so I didn't really need this one. But I also store my sleeping mask and a couple of earplugs inside of this, which I used mainly all the nights. Even though we were below the Arctic Circle, it's still bright throughout the night. So you need either a beanie to pull over your eyes or some sort of sleeping mask to sleep well throughout the night. Pair of socks that I sleep in. I have this pop-up mug from Sea to Summit that I use to make my oatmeal in the morning and instant pasta and so on for lunch. Really practical and comes to handy several times throughout the trip. My bike pump, I think this is called the Lesin HV pump or something. Never had to use it, but it's still good to know that it's there. And I also like to tape some duct tape on top of my pump so that I have a bit of duct tape with me in case of emergencies. And the second to last thing that I'm gonna pull out of here is my sleeping bag. And this is called the Aegis Max Ultralight Sleeping Bag. And this is also a really budget one. I think I paid like $80 for this one. And as long as it's around 10 degrees or about low 50s in Fahrenheit, this one works really well. And this one really compacts down very well. And the reason I don't have it in my stuff sack is that when I have it back here, I can pretty much cram it in and fill out all the space in the back of this bag. So leave your stuff sack at home and just cram in your sleeping bag instead. And the last thing I have in here is a spare inner tube. And that kind of fills out the last part of this seat pack. And in the last of my 3 bags, the frame bag, I keep my heavier things and also the poles and stakes for my tent. If you just open up this one, first of all I have the tripod that I usually film my bike trips on. This is just a bag with a bunch of cables and batteries for my cameras. A battery pack. And I believe that I also have a second battery pack, but that was a bit overkill. I would have been fine with just bringing one of these ones. I think both of these are 20,000 milliamp hours, so one would be enough. This is pretty interesting. This is my cook kit. I just bring one of these steel mugs. This is about 400 milliliters, and that's basically the water I need to make my freeze-dried meals. And in this small pouch I have the stove itself. This one is made by Primus, and that's the same brand as these gas canisters that I have here on the ground. So I mainly just attach this to the canister and then I boil my water on top of this. And this is basically the stove I went with throughout the trip. I also have a second gas canister in here. This one might be a bit overkill. I could have probably gone with just one, but I thought I needed this second one since I use it to keep all the mosquitoes away. I would probably have been better off showing you this in the beginning of this video because I attach this thing called a Thermacell on top of this. Just show you quickly here. Sort of like I do with a gas stove. And then I'll just turn this on like that, and then click this up, and in about 5 minutes or so this starts releasing some fumes that sort of scares off the mosquitoes in the nearest like 5 meters away from where you're sitting. So I use this a couple of nights. Sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't. Don't ask me why, but it's still a sort of comforting thing to know that you have this if you want to fight off the worst of the mosquitoes here in northern Sweden. You can just ask Ryan how many of them there were in his first couple of 3 or 4 days or so. Total insanity of mosquitoes in the northernmost point of Sweden. In here I also have the poles for my tent, which is a good thing that they actually fit inside of this one. Otherwise I would just have them strapped onto my handlebar bag, I guess. And also the small pegs for the tent. I have a sort of kitchen knife that I never rarely used. And the last 2 items are matches for my gas stove and a multi-tool that I never used throughout the whole trip. And hopefully you've already watched the video from our adventure here in northern Sweden. And if you want to watch another one of my bikepacking adventures, I recommend you to watch the one that I did last year up in northern Norway, where I started in the Lofoten Islands and went all the way up to the North Cape, which is the northernmost point here in Europe. And you can watch that video by clicking the link up in the corner here. Otherwise, until next time, have a good one. On a trip like this, if you're going bikepacking here in... oh.